Hey, it's Charles, Side by Side Garage. Today I'm going to discuss the proper belt break-in procedure for your drive belt on your side by side, as well as how to change it on this 19 Polaris RZR Turbo S. Now, even though this is a Polaris RZR, the procedure actually carries across many different brands, so it's either the same or very similar. So stay tuned. Now, a lot of guys out there will tell you whenever you're going to break in the belt that you don't actually have to do a belt break-in. They just say drive it however it is that you're going to actually drive the machine. That is something that I highly do not recommend you do, okay? You should absolutely break in your belt the proper way. Now, according to the Polaris manual, it says to drive the machine for 50 miles, and it says to vary the throttle, no hard acceleration, and carry light loads in it whenever you're going to break in your belt. And then it also says for sand or dune riding, whenever you're going to break in your belt, that you should do it for a total of at least 5 miles in low gear, vary the throttle, and no hard acceleration. What I usually suggest to guys is almost exactly along those same lines. I just call it a couple heat cycles. So I usually tell guys that what you need to do is vary the throttle, don't ever get hard on the gas, don't ever hold it wide open, and make sure you vary it so, you know, on and off the gas, never hold at one consistent RPM. And as long as you do that a few times and let your belt cool down in between those times, then you're going to get a lot longer life out of your drive belt. Now, whenever you buy a new side-by-side or even a used one, what I really like to do is break in the very first belt that's on that machine, get it all good to go, and then I'll immediately take it off and throw another brand new belt on the machine. The reason why I do that is so that I know that that spare belt I'm going to carry with me is a belt that's already been broken in. It's good to go. It's just one less thing you got to worry about whenever you're out there on the trail and crap hits the fan. Now, if you're going to change out your belt, you're going to need a few simple tools. What I like to use is the DeWalt here with the 8mm and a little swivel. This right here is to take off your belt cover. You don't have to use the DeWalt. You can get away with just an 8mm socket and a ratchet. It's fine. You're going to need a 3/16 nut driver. This is to take off the worm gear clamp that holds on the air intake that goes into your CVT housing. If you're running either like the RZR 1000 or the General, your toolkit, whenever you got your RZR, it should have came with one of these. And this does a few things. It allows you to adjust your shocks, but then on this side, it's actually a tool so that you can open up your secondary to get your belt off. And I'll explain that here in just a little bit. If you've got the Turbo, it should have came with this little L bolt, and this is a 1/4-20 thread. You don't have to have this. You can get away with a 1/4-20 bolt. But you can't have just a regular 1/4-20 bolt like this one right here. And the reason why is because this has that smooth shank portion right there. So you could actually thread this all the way into your secondary clutch and it would bottom out right there at the end of the threads before it fully compressed your secondary. So what you're going to need to do is either get a fully threaded bolt or a piece of 1/4-20 all thread. This is a homemade one right here. It's just got a piece of cold roll solid bar welded to it. That way I can get my whole hand on there. If you happen to break your dry belt whenever you're out there on the trail, you might need a set of needle nose pliers or just a regular set of pliers, as well as a razor blade, because usually whenever those belts go kaboom, they literally just blow up and go everywhere inside of your CVT. A lot of times they actually cause a lot of damage to your drive clutches, your belt housings, things like that. Usually you'll have chunks that go out of the CVT exhaust port, and a lot of guys will have like parts of the thread will actually get wrapped around that primary and the crank. You need to make sure you get all that out of there, because if you don't, you'll end up damaging that crank seal, losing some oil, and you made a bad day even worse. So next up, let's go over here to the RZR and we'll actually show you how to take off that cover and swap out the belt. First thing you need to do is take your 3/16 and actually take off this worm gear clamp. You don't have to take it fully off. You just got to get it loose enough so that you can slide this intake hose off of your belt cover. Next thing you're going to do is take your 8mm and take out all of these bolts in your cover. I believe there's 9 of them on here. Now you need to make sure and keep track of those bolts. I know on the newer machines, I think like the Pro XP, those bolts are actually captured inside of this cover, which is really nice. But all the other machines, your older machines, just make sure you keep track of them. All right, after you get all your bolts out of your CVT housing, you can just pull it straight out and it'll pop right off. On these Turbo S's, it's nice because this shock is actually out there a little bit, so you got plenty of room to get this housing out of there. On your regular 1000 stuff like that, this shock is a little bit closer there and it can be pretty tight. You might have to mess with it a little bit, but just play with the orientation of the housing and or the cover, and usually you can get it to slide right out. Now, if you've got a RZR 900 XP, those 1000 XPs, or your Generals, your secondary clutch is going to look like this, or real similar to it. In order to compress the secondary on those, use that little tool that'll come with your machine. You hook it underneath, and then you just pry against it like that. And that'll actually open this up so that you can get that belt to drop down in there, give you room so you can get it off. Now remember, this is the Turbo S. So on these turbo clutches, they got that 1/4-20, and there's 2 threaded holes in your secondary. You're just gonna put this in there. You'll feel it bottoming out, and that's whenever you have actually come into contact with the other sheave. So whenever you actually thread this in there, you're pushing against that spring tension. You'll notice that the drive belt is actually dropping down in that secondary. Once you get it fully compressed, you'll have to just work the drive belt over the edge of the secondary clutch. Always do this counterclockwise, never rotate it clockwise. And the reason why is because you don't want to accidentally rotate this primary clutch clockwise. If you accidentally rotate that, you can cause it to jump timing, and then it's a really bad day. So always counterclockwise. Before you actually pull this off, you want to take note of the orientation of your belt, because you always want to make sure that you put it back on there. Remember, this is going to be your spare belt, so you want to make sure that you put it back on there the same way. What I like to do is make it so that the Polaris right here is easy to read from this direction. So all my belts, I can read Polaris or the brand of belt on them, the part number, whatever. So I know that they always go back in the same way. Again, we've got our brand new drive belt. I can read Polaris, so I know it's going to go on this way. If you can just get it hooked around the bottom, and then you just start rotating it. Remember, we're going counterclockwise. Now it's on there. You can just back your clutch removal tool out. Once you get your tool out, you can spin that secondary, and you'll see the drive belt rising back up in there. While you have your CVT cover off, this is a really good time to actually look over everything and inspect it. Make sure that you don't have any like cracks in your housing, any excessive wear on your primary and your drive clutches, your secondary clutch, anything like that. If you're back in the shop setting, it's also a really good time to grab the compressed air and actually blow out all the dust and stuff like that. Obviously, you can't do that if you're out there on the trail changing your belt because you just broke one. Now that we got the new drive belt on there, we can do a quick visual inspection of our CVT cover. You want to especially make sure that your seal right here is still there. It's still intact. It's not damaged or anything. The newer machines, the seal's a lot smaller and it seems to stay down in there a lot better. The older machines, that seal is a lot bigger, and a lot of times you would fight with it whenever you're actually going to put this cover back on the machine. You would have it falling out of place and stuff like that. Not really the case on these newer ones. Make sure that whenever you do your inspection, you can also hit it with a quick blast of air, clean it up if you need to. Once you get the cover in place, Go back with all your bolts. You always start all these by hand. All right, now that we've got all the fasteners hand started there, I'm going to go back with my DeWalt. Now these fasteners are only supposed to be torqued to 35 inch-pounds, which is just under 3 foot-pounds, so it's not very much. So if you're using some sort of impactor, nut driver or something like that, an electric tool, don't go crazy with it. All you got to do is really snug them up there. Now that we've got all the cover fasteners all the way on there, we can go ahead and put our inlet hose back on. Take your 3/16 and tighten down your worm gear clamp again. Now, if you did happen to blow a belt out there on the trail, and whenever it comes apart, what I was mentioning earlier about the exhaust port or the air outlet, that's right up here on the top. And usually what will happen is those parts of the belt will fly out up here, and you'll actually find them on your skid plate, all over the front of your engine and your transmission area down in here. So you need to make sure that you actually find all those pieces and pick them up. And especially if you blew some out on the trail, make sure and do your part, pick that stuff up off the trail. That way you can dispose of it properly. Whenever it comes to spare belt storage on your side-by-side, what we recommend is that you're storing it somewhere that it's out of the elements, so it's clean and dry. You can put it in a Ziploc bag, a dry bag, one of those vacuum sealed bags if you want. What we don't recommend is zip tying it to the cage. Now I understand in racing situations that would be easily available, you can get to it quick and do your belt change, but that's because you're racing. You're not worried about the secondary aspect, which is that belt could be really nasty and you're just going to expedite the wear on your clutches. So we recommend that it's somewhere that it's going to be out of the elements. A few options that are out there. These are some zip up bags. You can get these from UTV Trails. It's the same guy that makes the app. I've had this for a couple years. I threw my spare belt in there, tossed it in the top of my rigid toolbox, and it's worked great. Another option that's out there, which is a really awesome option, is this Savage UTV case. This thing's weatherproof. Whenever you open it up here, it's got a really nice rubber seal, and this thing seals so well that whenever you're going through elevation changes, you can't really get this open unless you actually relieve the air pressure right here on this top. I believe now he's selling these where that you can get like a spare belt already in them, as well as some basic tools. He'll put like the basic tools in the foam cutouts right here so that you have everything essential to actually swap that belt out on the trail. So it's a nice, clean, convenient package. You just take these and it goes right on your roll cage with a couple worm gear clamps, and it'll be nice and clean. Besides a proper belt break-in and setting your machine up properly, it really comes down to the driver. You can put the worst driver in an excellent machine that's properly tuned, and you can blow a belt within a matter of minutes. You have to know when you need to be on the throttle and when you got to let off, when your belt's slipping, when it's not, and what it's capable of. We usually recommend to new drivers out there that if you're going, say, 15, 20 miles an hour, I would probably keep it in low range. If you're actually going above that, you can usually shift it into high and be okay. If you're doing a steep climb, you also want to make sure that you're down in low range, or maybe you're actually have a big load on the machine, like say you're towing a guy back that broke down on the trail. Go ahead and keep the machine in low for that usually. Something else you want to make sure and do is that after you're really hard on your belt, whether you did a climb or you were doing some pretty hardcore rock crawling or whatever, don't just shut the machine off whenever you're done. Throw it in park and just let it sit there and idle. That way that primary clutch is actually getting that airflow down through your CVT and cooling that belt down. Other than that, hopefully you guys learned a thing or two. We'll catch you next time. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share.